Chapter 27. The 12. Xing was ruled by the 12 houses, each house representing a trade or aspect of the economy. They bickered constantly, but at least they never pretended where real power lay: arms, money, and land. In Xing it was not heritage that gave one power, it was simply assets and one's skill in using them. Darius had connections enough, he supposed, but he didn't expect all 12 of the noble houses to agree to meet him. This was a blessing as much as it was a problem. The 12 house leaders usually used representatives or family members to sit in for them. In this case, the house leaders were going to be present. The fact they agreed to meet him meant they acknowledged him, of course, but it also meant they saw him as a potential threat. He had hoped he could let sleeping dogs lie a little longer, but it seemed he would be involved in politics sooner than he hoped. Darius realized it might have more to do with Gauss and the potential of his house rising from the ashes. "Welcome, Colonel Retired Darius Urn. We are glad you have arrived early. The houses have been expecting you." A greeter met him with a handshake. He was expected to change clothes before meeting with the nobles, partially to ensure all were well dressed, also to ensure no weapons would be taken in. If you met with the 12 houses, you came unarmed. Most of the decision-makers were in attendance. At least that would make this happen quicker. He needed reinforcements for Meredith. He was going to get them too. He had no doubt of it. Isla would have been good to present, but she was predisposed. As for Alice, he didn't want them anywhere near her, and this was too important to send a representative alone. He did have 2 men with him and written contracts at the ready. There was little sign of pleasantries, only business. As it should be, he supposed. Many looked upon him with indifference. Few recognized him by his face alone. The nobles would have done their homework. They didn't get their positions through compliments or drink choices. Their lapdogs watched him closely to gather any impressions. They studied enemies or potential allies. They studied Darius, too. He would need to be ready to play on their interests. The fact they were here early wasn't anything too special, since they often had any kinds of business and people wishing to see them. But all of them showing up on the same day, that was rare. Darius entered the doors that were opened by guardsmen. Inside was a room full of unimpressive middle-aged or elder men. They didn't seem to have taken the effort to dress to their station. The worst-dressed men were the most powerful, wearing more comfortable than formal clothing. Darius looked at them and came on strong. "Are all necessary parties present?" he asked. Some stood and some remained in their seats. Some studied Darius carefully and others didn't bother to look at him. These were the most powerful men in Xing, and they knew it. "Yes," a servant answered him. The 12 themselves did not speak. Not yet. Darius supposed that's how it was going to be. He summarized the situation quickly. At a small town by the river, you are no doubt aware that there has been a sighting of a witch coven. This coven is of substantial size, confirmed by both guild and druids as well above 30. He lied, of course. He had no idea how many there were. The servant responded, "We are aware of this and have had the local magistrate and guild of Xing alerted. They assure us it is under control." Darius believed building rapport would be a waste here. "We've been at war too long, gentlemen. Threats we've ignored have grown. Witches are capable of many magics, but what worries me is the size. Witches in groups of 3 often manipulate cities. A group of this side could manipulate Xing. With a piece of hair and a full name, as I understand it, they can manipulate any of us. Odds are they already have. I believe they have been attempting to control a number of houses by threatening firstborns and children. They are capable of hypnosis, and as members of the noble houses, your families would be the first to suffer." One of them finally spoke. "Your concern is noted. However, it is our problem. You needn't concern yourself." Darius countered, "I am concerned about them taking quite a bit of land and having the potential to corrupt our economy to manipulate the very workings of Xing. They've already wiped out a town, and the response given was pitiful. It is guaranteed to fail. 2 of the 12 houses benefit directly from the wood that town supplied. It can be rebuilt, but the witches are sure to strike again if they are not dealt with. Further, they are going to be emboldened by their victory and likely ambitious to try their magic in other places." Another of the nobles spoke. He wore commoner clothes, and was the direct benefactor of the wood being shipped to the port. "You seem to act like they're a bigger problem than they are. Shouldn't you be tending to the soldiers of Blackmaw?" Darius expected that question, sooner or later. "They're a problem, one that when dealt with would free up a fair bit of land, reduce loss of life, and reduce the chance of instability in our economy. They can be dealt with easily with the flick of a pen. The men of Blackmaw are healing, and the healing's being overseen. Rest assured. The war heroes will be well. The prodigy herself oversees their recoveries." One of them looked up with interest. "Yes, the one that made the cure, and painkillers earlier." Darius kept his arms folded behind him. "Yes, business has been going well, and to keep it going well for all of us, I'm going to clean up the mess which no one else wants to deal with." The noble of the wood looked interested. "You believe you can deal with the witches? How? Do you have some simple solution?" Darius smiled. He had figured this would happen. He was one of the 12 who would support him. Another would soon follow. They wanted that town operational as soon as possible, although it was an acceptable loss to simply wait out the witches and their wrath. As simple as solutions come, I mean to murder them. All of them. For a coven of size, a force of 1,000 for a period of less than 2 weeks will ensure all the witches dead with minimum casualties and resources lost. Soldiers are in common supply. The war has just ended, and there are many who could use the employment. It will be a simple matter to assemble a number of that size. They certainly weren't going to offer him that many. He needed 200 or so. They could probably guess that, but he was an expert on war. They were not. One of the more conservative nobles spoke. "It's not impossible to gather a force, but that seems excessive to deal with a few witches." Darius clarified. "Not a few, a coven. They can kill over 10 times their number. Even witch-blades would require outnumbered forces to be successful." Another noble reminded Darius, "We've already sent out a force, and the witch-hunters are already there." Darius agreed. "Yes, I have received a report from one of my associates that I sent there. They've made it clear to me they will be overwhelmed. Assuming, of course, they're not dead already. What's more, when a coven kills, they grow in number. They force men and women to breed or enthrall them into obedience. Every failed attempt only helps them. If you lose the witch-blades, our experts will be lost. So, rather than waiting for the problem to get worse and more expensive, I'll deal with it now. Give me men. I'll see them slain, every single one." He spoke so coldly and matter-of-factly it was difficult to doubt he could do it. But 1,000 men. Too many. One of the more astute began the inquisition. "You have been taking crates of iron sand to a location over many weeks. You have been making some rather large purchases. May I ask what you're doing with all this?" Darius didn't expect this. Not this early. Luckily his response was simple enough. "Expansion. Understand, we need more iron sand to study, in order to improve the cure. I have a personal stake in the well-being of my men. I wish to see them improve, as I've said. The rest is for expansion. Speaking of expansion, once the witches fall, there will be quite a bit of land which will become usable. It may be possible to make as many as 3 wood-cutting colonies, which would improve the navy by reducing the cost of lumber." The nobles who had the most to gain flashed their interest. He wasn't wrong, but what was in it for Darius? All he needed was forces. That's all. What did he stand to gain? "And you do this out of the kindness of your heart?" asked one. Darius spoke plainly. "I do this out of self-interest. It is a gesture which will assist in positive relationships with powerful families. It will make my company appear charitable, as it will those who agree to help. I am equipped with weapons which may prove effective against witches. In time, those weapons will be for sale. This problem has greater priority. If you are slow to act, people will lose faith in the 12 noble houses when family members show up in body bags. It will become abundantly clear that you could have acted but did not. The cost is small and the potential gain is great. It removes the threat and ever-increasing costs. Give me the men, and your need to worry about witches will be gone for a long time. I'll see to that. Or you can ignore them until they're holding your families hostage and openly butchering passerby on the road. I wouldn't allow it myself." Considering what he was asking, he made a convincing argument. or at least enough for them to serve their purposes. Two already whispered to each other. The others likely would not pitch in. So something could be said that might make them a tiny bit generous. Who would be willing to offer men for the purpose? Darius asked. As expected, 2 of them would. The others would not. We will assist. Darius looked to the others. You should at least make a minimal contribution lest you appear weak in the public eye. You all have something to gain from this. The cost is not money, but labor. I need men, and for a short time. They will be at minimal risk when we attack in excessive force. You cannot say you will not benefit from lessened costs in lumber as well. You have very little to lose. A few more thought about it. We will assist, another house said. Then another. Most were willing to contribute men, but none said what number. That's why Darius had the paperwork ready with his legal aid behind him. This document will give me permission to lead this expedition. Even if you do not intend to contribute, you should at least allow me to deal with the problem. None had any issue with letting Darius handle this problem. In fact, it was beneath them. For some, even the conversation was beneath them. So little was being asked from them that giving him clearance to arm a small militia to deal with the witches wasn't worth much to them. But some of the more concerned members of the council had a bigger problem. Darius was crafty and someone to be watched. They could at least agree that he wasn't their enemy and his request wasn't lunacy. Dealing with witches was necessary, and he could certainly see to it without their calling out the full might of the Qing military. They debated who would contribute men and how many. Darius sat silent, listening until they ultimately settled. Darius had access to 400 men, some of whom were from the house's personal guards. The least interested offered small groups of men numbering 25. The more interested were willing to commission as many as 100. He managed to reach a number well beyond his goal. Considering the short notice, it was acceptable. Few of the nobles would let an operation of this size happen without at least someone they trusted to spy on it. At minimum, every house would send a small force of capable men, if nothing else to report how it was handled. Darius could use the competent help, but even he knew it would cost him. Darius let the legal aides do their work and excused himself, stating he would mobilize at once. Considering the timing and his rank, it would be an easy task to send the forces post-haste. Ultimately, it was cheaper to do now than later, and it was a problem not worth discussing a second time. It would be, as Darius said, build rapport and was a simple solution instead of mobilizing the true army. Using a small host of soldiers with some from the houses ensured minimal effort and casualties. The more they discussed it, the more willing they became. Darius was glad it was quick. He still might not be there soon enough. Chapter 28. Moonwood. Meredith wished he could sleep, but it was better if he didn't. He had to keep an eye open for potential threats in the wood. Close to the river was a good place to rest. Until the river was corrupted, they could simply switch from one side of the river to the other. What's more, he doubted Claire, Sven, and Kenson would make it easy for them to do so. Until then, he kept his eyes open for witches. There wasn't much in the way of signs. He assumed they'd prepare something on the other side of the river, but so far nothing. Was there some other reason they didn't cross the river? He hoped not. He hoped that pushing them across the river wasn't some kind of trap in and of itself. It actually was starting to worry him. There was no opportunity to investigate further. Maybe they had just gotten lucky and the witches simply didn't think they'd make it this far. Or they thought they'd be wiped out so quickly that they didn't need to worry about the river? No, he feared it was too obvious an opening. They almost certainly would have considered a river. If a non-magic user thought of it, surely a coven of witches would have considered it. Then again, maybe they thought mortals wouldn't know the rules of magic. The wood seemed to rustle. The wind kicked up and the leaves began to sprinkle from the trees. Meredith slowly stood, wondered if he should wake those who slept, still exhausted. Damn, he didn't know what it was, but something felt off. A feeling on its own wasn't enough to merit an alarm. He studied carefully. A little wind. Well, it was as if the trees were creaking and talking to one another. The leaves danced around in a rather fanciful manner. Something was happening. But what? Sai opened his eyes when Marius raised his body. He held the passed-out Mina close to him. She slept soundly and had become a sweaty, muddy mess like the rest of them. Sai looked to Meredith curiously, then to the trees. He blinked, but didn't seem alarmed in any way. The opposite, in fact. He became excited. A smile crossed his face. Faye. Meredith responded as eloquently as he knew how. Huh? Sai looked around but did not let go of Mina. Faye! Oh shoot! Do you have anyone who can speak to them? Meredith made it clear how much of that he understood. Huh? Sai shook his head, as if to think of another way to put it. Elves, tree spirits, fairies. They're Fae. Witches are enemies of Fae. Meredith remembered him saying something about that. Yeah, that's what you said on the cart, right? Sai nodded. Well, that's why they're not crossing the river. Fae. We're basically in their territory, more or less. I mean, I didn't know that, but they're using the trees to spy on us. Hey, can we get some help? Meredith thought him mad for shouting at some trees. You're surely not just talking to some trees. It doesn't look like magic or anything to me. Sai waited quietly and listened to the trees. Surely he didn't speak tree. Actually, he was trying to wrap his head around the concept of speaking to trees. This was new. There was quiet for a while and Sai slowed his breathing and frowned. I don't think they're going to respond. Meredith tried really hard to detect if there was something in the trees or something he was missing, but he ultimately had to agree. Yeah, I don't think the trees feel like talking. Sai relaxed a bit more and laid himself back down with Mina, trying to wrap her in a blanket as best he could while keeping her somewhat dry. Well, maybe they don't speak to mortals. That's not too uncommon. Meredith at last settled down and rested a bit longer. It was some time before someone else woke up. You need to rest, and motioned for him to get some sleep. Meredith didn't know whether to refuse or not. He was tired, true, but at least he had slept more than most did on the ride there. He half expected this sort of nonsense. Could he rely on them to keep watch over him while he slept? He weighed the pros and cons. Not yet, he thought to himself. It wasn't a matter of not trusting their intentions. Their intentions hardly mattered. It was the cruel possibility of failure. It was the likely chance the witches would be able to take out Meredith first, and more easily while he slept. It wasn't a matter of waking Meredith in time. It was the ability to intercept whatever attack came. Meredith might barely be able to do that while awake, let alone groggy after a fresh awakening. He could not rest. Not yet. Meredith would wait until most of the group got some sleep. He checked to see if he had another cloth to wrap around him. He had nothing. Then someone handed him a warm drink. How did he make it hot? The cup had a minor enchantment to warm the liquid inside. If you're going to stay up, at least take this, said the one who gave it. Upon taking a better look at the young man he was ignoring, Meredith realized it was Morgan, still injured and ashamed at defeat. But he had no delusions about why he was alive. Meredith deserved his thanks, and the fact he was injured was his own fault. He underestimated the witches and went in early looking for glory. Morgan looked at Meredith with an apologetic look and sat next to him. His arm was still broken. Mina certainly helped him, but he felt bad. You should have just let me die, he said under his breath. Meredith sipped the coffee and kept his eyes open. Yeah, well, you had Mina with you. Couldn't let her die. Morgan smirked but seemed sad. Yeah, I messed up big time. Organizing the group was easy, and I brought everything I was supposed to. But I figured there'd be safety in numbers. We'd go in, kill some witches, go home and share funny stories. Meredith nodded. Most people imagine the way things are going to be before it actually happens. I come from the land of iron. I'm not sure what I was expecting, but I thought it would be better than home. Honestly, it wasn't, but I don't regret what I did. Morgan must have heard about the Black Maw thing at some point. Even if you ended up in Black Maw? Meredith sipped his drink again. blowing a little on it even though the cup was heating it. It's weird how willing people are to die. I went in there perfectly fine with dying. Not for some cause, not because I wanted to die, but because I simply wouldn't back down. I can't imagine back when I left the mountains in the land of iron that I'd be volunteering for suicide missions. But I don't regret it. I don't regret a damned thing. So long as the decisions are mine and I made them, I see any reason for regret. Morgan questioned him. Should I regret what I did? Meredith didn't know the answer. Maybe, but I wouldn't. Right now, regret is the last thing you need to be focusing on. Keep your eyes open. Even if you can't move your arms, you can still use your eyes. You can still help those who are shivering from the cold. Morgan chuckled. Not what I imagined I'd be doing. Not very heroic. Meredith looked him in the eye. Heroes die. I try not to be one. Morgan was curious. A bit hypocritical, don't you think, coming from a guy who went on a suicide mission? Weren't you concerned about, I don't know, having kids? Growing old? Something? Meredith raised his shoulders. Nah, if I had kids I'd feel sorry for the poor bastards. Who knows what sort of miserable life I'd give them? Morgan might have said something else, but he got quiet. Something was off. An eerie quiet settled in before the trees creaked and the leaves began to fall as the wind blew. Meredith watched curiously and drank quickly, while slowly reaching for his weapon. Eyes flicked around the woods. It was the blackest of night. Even the moonlight was covered by a cloud. Yeah, now was the time to get ready. Meredith started to stand once again. Was it the Fae again? Cy didn't get up this time. He was less alert. The woodwinds blew, and Meredith slowly handed his cup back to Morgan, who found a dry place to put it in the dark. Soon he too stood, using his one good arm to hold a short blade. The soldier readied himself for anything, or so he thought. Out of the wood came steps, slow steps, but not quiet ones. Rather, they were deliberately making their presence known. "Moon's tidings," said a male voice from the trees. A female voice joined him. "Tell me, my mud-covered friends, are you the ones who drew witch blood? Are you the ones who even now enrages the coven?" Meredith motioned with his hands at Morgan to wake up the others. He actually had to do it twice, since it was so dark. Morgan didn't see the first time. "We are from Shing. A witch coven of considerable size was found by a group of druids and we're responding. Who are you?" The male voice got closer. "Friends for now. For later, who can say? We come to offer aid to your cause. We are not friends of the witches or their spawn. Moon hide you should face them alone. We are elves of the Moon Court. Word has spread far of the actions of Isadora and her coven. I am called Selreth." The moonlight shone and revealed what appeared to be fair creatures of exceptional figures. The male had slightly shorter hair than his female counterpart. His black hair did not reflect the light of the moon. It did look sleek and well kept, though. He wore a decorated mail of armor, very light and most likely mithril by the look of it. A single ornate single-edged blade and a bow on his back with relatively few arrows and a cloak with dots which shined like stars. Upon closer inspection, it appeared to look exactly like the sky behind him. If he were high up in a tree, it would probably fool most onlookers into thinking he was just a spot of sky in between the trees. His build was slender but toned. Like most elves, his ears were pointy and his skin pale. His far more enchanting companion wore mithril as well, although the links were thin as seen through her armor. It seemed purposely revealing to the onlookers. In her hand was a similar blade, though the runes looked different. Her hair was long and silver, with ornate little decorations on her hair and ears. Her bow was larger than her friend's. Mithril stockings on her legs hugged close to the skin. She stepped close to the humans and studied them in the darkness with her faintly glowing, pale eyes. Meredith caught himself letting his eyes wander over her. Well, at least she wore underwear, he observed to himself. She smirked slightly when her eyes flicked to him. "Do you like what you see, human?" She didn't sound particularly angered or offended. He doubted this was the first time she used this line. Meredith supposed he did. What business do you have with us? He's Selrith. Who are you? From where do you hail? And how did you find us?" The female elf looked over the whole party. "I am called Arundella. We hail from the Fey realm, tried mortal. We found you as we find all things, when things wander in our woods. Other things call out to us for aid. We have heard the sounds of your woodsmen for quite some time. We had little issue with the harvesting of lumber, as they were careful to plant after they took from nature. When the witches struck, we readied our weapons and came quickly." Meredith relaxed a bit. Perhaps they were telling the truth. This didn't seem to be a trick. Well, better late than never. Selrith made note of the sight behind them. "We are early. Entering your realm takes time. We are the advance. Though the fight may be between witch and mortals, we have preferences. Far better for the witches to die here and now. They have grown bold, and they bring sacrilege to all they touch. Rest, mortals. We offer you our protection. The witches and their spawn dare not cross the river." Meredith placed his sword in a lead sheath and approached the elves. He supposed if they wanted to kill them right now, they wouldn't need to try very hard. Deception wouldn't be necessary. "I am called Laredo. I guard the wounded until the witchblades return. The witchblades hunt the witches that would corrupt the river." Arundella glanced at her partner, then back to Meredith. "You believe they would?" Meredith didn't know, nor did he pretend to. "I am no expert on magic or witches, but those who are seem to think so. They will keep them from corrupting the river as long as they can. I am certain they will make it difficult for the witches." Arundella smiled and nodded. "I've no doubt, but we must wait. Soon others will arrive. We are merely the advanced force. We should strike with full force. Your forces no doubt make ready in the city?" Meredith was not sure. "I sent a report, but they haven't gotten back to us. For now, I guess we hold out until we get backup. Any help is most welcome. Do you have shelter?" The tiny elf smiled playfully at the taller man. "Though we cannot offer full hospitality, I can offer a far warmer and safer place than this." Selrith agreed. "She is right. Come with us. It won't be much more than hollowed-out trees, but there are many places to stay, well enchanted and protected from witch magic. You may stay the night there until your witchblades return. Once they do, we shall discuss tactics."